It is easy to see someone achieve more and judge them from the corner of the room. But it is so much better and healthier for you to go up to that person and say, wow, you're doing phenomenal things. What can you teach me? How can I help you? How can you help me?
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited that you've chosen to join us today. We have another fantastic guest, Dr. Adaira Landry, and I'm just going to give you a little opportunity to tell us about yourself and your journey to medicine.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Erkeda, for allowing me and inviting me to come on to your show and talk to you and your guest. So I am Dr. Adaira Landry. I am in the Boston area. I've been here for about 8 years. I think my journey really emphasizes the power of skills and building skills and how it's never too late. And I would say that, my journey probably starts truly when I was in, grade school, and I was not very popular or athletic. So I really only had books and some school supplies, to sort of spend time with. And I studied a lot and did well enough where I started first grade early, and then I skipped seventh grade. So I was like 12 when I started high school. And then by the time I got accepted to UC Berkeley, I was 15. And so I remember moving out, and my parents were in Southern California, and I moved out to Northern California. And it was like a very, very different experience. And I didn't have the skills of networking or sort of deciding what opportunities are out there for me in such a big, big institution. I went to a really small private school. And so everything was like more available when I was in high school. But in college, it was very easy to feel just like a number. And there were very, very few Black students when I was at Berkeley. I think there were less than 2% of the entire population on the campus were Black, and a good chunk of them were athletes, actually, and that was part of the controversy. And so I'd be in a pre-med class, and I'd be like one of few. And I have a feeling that that's still the experience for most people, and especially larger institutions, that they are, the only one in their physics class or chemistry class. I might have been the only one, but I was like one of few many times. Mm-hmm. And so the journey felt isolating. I didn't feel like I had the confidence to go and ask my professors questions about their career. And I didn't really understand the idea of just building a network and learning how to craft a career. It wasn't really until the end of medical school when I had someone for the first time ever reach out to me and say, hey, how can I support you? And it was a Black woman. And she was the first person who really showed me that I can make it, because, I think having someone who has the exact career you want and that person looks like you, it's not surprising that speaks volumes, because I know then okay, this system actually will allow me to dream big and achieve those goals. And I feel like it means much more from another Black woman than it does like an older white woman who's like, you can do it because I did it. And I'm like, that's not how it works for me. And so she was the first person who really showed me the power of networking. And then I would say since then, I really understood the value of meeting new people. And that's really why I wanted to come onto this podcast to meet you, Erkeda. I was like, oh, you sound really awesome. Your podcast sounds really awesome. And it's a great networking opportunity, right? To come on here, because now we're a part of each other's network. And the other thing is, I want to add is that I learned, rather late, the idea that I can keep building skills. And I wasn't a writer, but I've started writing over the last 3 or 4 years. If you had asked me 10 years ago to write a paper, a first author paper, I would have said no, no way. Even 5 years ago, I would have found a reason not to do it, because I really felt like I wasn't a writer. Mm-hmm. And I felt like writing was an innate skill that I just didn't have. But over the last few years, I've learned no, you can continue to build skills, even things that we have previously thought were just stuff you're born with or without. Mm-hmm. And so my career now is really focused on helping other people craft their journey, shape their journey, and then encouraging people to pursue their skills and network.
I love all of that. And actually, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, you probably saw me looking down and taking notes. I was actually taking notes because you said so many powerful things and real things. Like a lot of times when students look up to physicians and attendings when we're in a certain position, they don't know how we got there or that we may have felt the similar way that they felt. So you mentioned kind of feeling isolated when you were in college because you were in a smaller group of people. And although you're taking the same classes and stuff, it feels different. I had a similar experience when I was in medical school at BU. I did kind of a combined program, which the listeners, if you've listened for a while, you've heard about, where I went to a historically Black college, Hampton University. Shout out to you guys. But I did 2 summers in my entire senior year at BU as an undergrad before going into the medical school. And it was like a culture shock where you're kind of like the only one, and then people aren't like trying to study with you and all of those kinds of things that can go. And while people may say like, oh, like, yeah, it's the same. We're all studying the same way. You need that sense of camaraderie and yes, you're unique and all of those kinds of things, but it's important to see people in the environment that also look like you. So that's why it's so important to advocate for diversity in all spaces. And then you also mentioned like it took a while for you to find a mentor who was looking out for you and who looked like you and who had similar experiences, who could kind of help you kind of go in the direction you want to go into. And that is so also important why we need diversity in every level of medical education so that we can have those experiences. And yes, I'm not saying that you can't have a mentor who is from a different background than you, but it also is so powerful to have these people who look like you helping to encourage and empower you because they have likely had similar experiences. And then the third thing that you talked about in terms of the power of networking, like that is so important. Like that's why I think that every student who is listening should have a LinkedIn page because there's so much more that we can do when we get to know other people through different organizations, through different ways of networking. And now that we have technology, we can expand that outside of our regions and be worldwide. So there's so many opportunity to get to know each other. And I think the worst people can do is just say no. Like I always tell people, like reach out and say, like, let's have a virtual coffee and those things. I think we originally connected on there's something called Slack. For those who may not be familiar, is very popular in the tech field, where there are lots of different interest groups and stuff like that. So we're in one, I think that's called Forbes Black. In it, I saw you mention something. So I reached out and was like, hey girl, you're a doctor, I'm a doctor too, let's chat. And you're like, oh, you got a podcast, I want to come on. So it's okay to do those kinds of things because you can kind of meet people who may share similar interests to you, or you may be able to combine and do different things, or come in and kind of share your gifts with the world like you're doing right now.
That's exactly right. And social media has been transformative for me. And I will say I'm really bad at posting on social media. Like I feel like I have adorable children, but I don't post my kids. I eat good meals. I don't post my food. Like I don't really share that part of my life, but I spend a lot of time looking out at what other people are doing and using it as a tool to just sort of see what opportunities are available. I'm certain that one of the reasons why I'm writing a book was because I saw a lot of people posting who were physicians about their book experience. I was like, oh, I never thought about like writing a book as a doctor. I wonder if that's something that I could do. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, and this is kind of funny because, you know, I'm older, I'm getting closer to 40, and I hear some of the younger kids say things like, oh, they're all up in my DMs. And I didn't realize that that's like a bad thing because I am in everyone's DMs. Like that is how you connect, is you DM people and you have a conversation that way. So I'm just going to remove that stigma. And I just say things like, hey, I saw your article. I saw your post. This was really awesome. Please let me know, if you want to connect. My intentions are purely professional. And I feel like that's a great place to, get to know someone on a much deeper level than you can with like a thread that's like in a public conversation. So social media has helped me more than almost anything because I can reach out to people who otherwise have been sort of unreachable or just off my radar.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. And I know that we're talking a lot about this, but I want to kind of hammer down on it for the listeners out there that it's so important to utilize your network and so important to reach out for opportunities, because I think a lot of times when we are seeing people who are thriving, who are doing great things, there's always like that comparison that people do. They're like, oh, they were in this magazine, but I could never do it. They were on this news platform, but I could never do it. And you kind of have that imposter syndrome. And it can even feed into other things where you're in class and you're in school and you're like, oh, they got out of the test too quickly. Like they probably got an A and blah, 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 but just do you. So what I'm saying is, it's so important to utilize that network and to just ask questions, because there have been so many opportunities where, like you mentioned, if I wanted to write an op-ed, or if I wanted to have a spot on something or be on a podcast, I would just like reach out to them and ask and talk about what you want to do. And those types of things can kind of help as you're applying to residency, applying to med school, or even doing things outside of medicine, because you are not only going to be a doctor, like that'll be a component of what you are, but there's so much more to you than that.
Exactly. And I was curious if you'd want to talk about imposter syndrome, because I, as an educator, mentor for the medical school, and I do a lot of stuff for the college here too, I see a lot of folks using that term when and sometimes it's appropriate, but I think many times it's not. And I encourage anyone who feels like they have imposter syndrome to actually go and read the original paper. It was published in 1973 by two white women psychologists. Mm. And what they did in that paper was they looked at women who were mostly white women, mid-career, who were doing phenomenal things and were being recognized by their peers, and they were getting awards and people were congratulating them. I mean, they were in a positive environment, but they just felt like they were fraudulent. But they were being supported. They were being recognized. And what I see often for many of us is very different than that scenario, which is that we feel like we recognize our own potential and we know that there is a lot that we can offer. It's that no one's welcoming us or including us. And so it's not really imposter syndrome, because it's not that you feel fraudulent. It's that you feel unseen and unheard and unwelcomed, unsupported, all of those things. It is something that I remember the first time I was in medical school, and it's actually the first day of medical school, a student came into the classroom and we were all sitting in the auditorium, everyone's just waiting for the orientation to start. And a student came in and he was literally wearing a white coat and carrying a first aid step up book for like the exam, the standardized board exam, step 1. And we were all like, what is this? Because we hadn't even had our white coat ceremony yet. So we're like, how does this guy have a white coat? And so I went to go chit chat with him. And honestly, he's a really wonderful person. This isn't a slight against him, but this is a reflection of the system. Because, his older sister was a medical student. His mom was in healthcare, and he knew he wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon like day one. And so they said, oh, if you want to be an orthopedic surgeon, let me set you up with some people to shadow. And here's a white coat. And you also need to do really well in your steps. So before you get into medical school, start studying, right? So he had this like inside scoop. And I went home, I felt really bad about it. And my roommate was like, oh, you probably just have imposter syndrome. And that's the first time I actually read the paper. I was like, that's not what's going on. I don't feel fraudulent. I just recognize that he and I are in the same exact institution, and he already has a network. Like he already has those orthopedic surgeons he's shadowing. He has his sister, he has his mom, and I didn't have that. And so that's why I felt bad, was that gap in support.
I can totally identify with that. And I think that hopefully you guys who are listening are finding this valuable as kind of like your inside scoop, because there are disparities in terms of how people come into medicine and what their different knowledge bases are. Some people are first generation students. Some people don't have the experience or the background and different things, or the wherewithal where they have siblings or parents in medicine. And you're kind of navigating it quote unquote by yourself. So that's why it's also good to ask questions and to try to figure out and kind of network with your colleagues and your classmates. Like you went and introduced yourself to them instead of kind of talking about them amongst your friends or something in the group. You were like, hey, what's up with this? So then he told you learned about the Step Up book he was reading, and you're like, oh, maybe I should look into that. So the more we talk about things, the more you can learn, which could probably help yourself as well.
That is so critical. It is easy to see someone achieve more and judge them from the corner of the room, but it is so much better and healthier for you to go up to that person and say, wow, you're doing phenomenal things. What can you teach me? How can I help you? How can you help me? Right? Because that's how you level the playing field. You definitely don't level the playing field from observing someone from a distance and feeling like you can never achieve that. You can. I mean, a lot of what separates people who have succeeded well and people who haven't is the network. It's the connections. And from those connections, you learn about opportunities. You are introduced to other people, but it's that.
Absolutely. Kind of stepping outside of your bubble and learning things. So joining the interest group organizations, getting mentors, talking to different faculty members, shadowing and things outside of what is just in the basic curriculum. Like one of my friends, she had heard about pathology, and we don't have that in most standardized curriculums for schools. So she went and asked like a pathologist, could she shadow them? And then she ended up doing a rotation in the 4th year, and that's what she's doing with her life. You have to kind of seek out opportunities, as well as some opportunities come to you when you're open to them and when they have you at the top of your mind. So kind of like, for instance, even as attendings, there are lots of conferences out there, and a lot of them, when you go to them, you pay a fee, and a lot of them are in your field. Some of them, as you decide to explore different things, they may not be necessarily covered by like CME dollars and stuff, which is continuing medical education that you have to do throughout your entire career. But there are some conferences out there that are invite only. And there are several different factors with that. It kind of goes with like the nepotism, it goes with the favoritism, it goes with the old boys club and all of those things. So I was invited to a few invite-only conferences more recently, and I'm like, hey, like, why are there no Black people here? Or why are there only like 5 of us and there are thousands of people here? So networking and talking can help you get into these rooms that can also kind of decrease the things that we are working for, like decreasing bias and working to have more equitable spaces and environments. But if people don't know that you exist and don't know your interests and don't know those types of things, you'll never get invited to the table.
There is so much truth to what you just said, and the power of introducing yourself. So you mentioned things like LinkedIn and other social networks. I also agree with you on conferences. And one of the things that I've recognized is the power of actually just sitting in like a cafe or in a hallway at a conference. And when you see someone, like saying, hey, how's it going? Do you have 5 minutes to chit chat? Or scheduling meetings ahead of time at the conference. Like for me personally, I'm realizing more and more that I'm probably an introvert, not an extrovert. I'm not shy. Like I love to talk to people, but I like to do it in a smaller environment. It just feels more comfortable for me than like being in like a really loud environment and like, talking about the weather or like small sort of topics. I like to sort of dive deep into a conversation with like a really small group. And so, when I go to a conference, I try to schedule some one-on-one time with people. And, if there's a speaker who you really want to see, you can email them, ask them for 10 minutes before their talk or 10 minutes after their talk. Keep the request low, right? Don't ask someone for an hour because no one's going to have an hour at a conference. Mm-hmm. Most people won't. Maybe some will, but most people won't. But I mean, I think like those sorts of efforts, I guess what I'm trying to describe is effort, in that you have to really assume responsibility for your career. There was a moment when I first started at the Brigham, and that moment was actually like 3 years, where I felt like, well, everyone around me is like getting promoted and all of these honors and all of these awards, and they're just being recognized for their hard work. And I felt like that wasn't happening to me. And I think it wouldn't have mattered if I didn't see it happening so much, so often, so deep. Like that's what, if it was like a rare thing, I'd be like, whatever. But because I felt like it was happening all the time. And then I learned from someone Again, this concept of effort. I asked one of my colleagues, I'm like, how are you getting all of these like honors and awards and promotions? These things matter to an academic institution. It goes on your CV and all that stuff. I said, how are all of these people just like spontaneously nominating you for stuff? And he's like, Adaira, what are you talking about? I am driving all of this. Like, I find something I want. I find people to nominate me. Very often, they ask me to draft my own letters of recommendation. Like, this is a me thing. This is not everyone's just looking out for me and my well-being and they're spontaneously nominating me without any input. Like, I am driving this. And that was like a really crazy light bulb moment for me, because for years I was just like, oh, at some point in time, I will get nominated for one of these leadership programs that, you know, people are hosting and sending out all the time as far as, you know, we need one faculty member to go. Who wants to go? Like, I was like, at some point in time, someone will mention my name in the room, right? As opposed to now, if I see that, I will say, if it's something I'm interested in, I would say, I'm interested in this. And I might also add someone else's name. I think they would be great too, because I think it's important to sponsor other people at the same time.
You said some wonderful things right there. And I just want to point out about 3 of them. Number 1, like, go after what you want. No one's going to come and look for you. Most of the time, people do want the best for you and they'd be happy. It's not on the top of their mind. Mm-hmm. You can make it easier by drafting the letter, finding all of the information, going and advocating for yourself. Like, that can make a world of a difference. And for the most part, it kind of makes them look good too. Like, especially if it's in your department or something like that, who wouldn't want their doctor like leading at a conference or speaking there or on one of the top doctor sites or something like that. I mean, even if it's something external, they're always going to kind of connect it back to your home institution. Like, it'll be like Dr. Landry of the Brigham. Like, they're not just going to say like Dr. Landry physician most of the time. And the second thing that you said kind of brought up other things just about asking. You went and you asked your colleague, like, how did you get nominated for that? And all of these kinds of things, because asking questions can lead to so many different things. I've learned this over the past few years, even like in terms of advocating for yourself for raises and things or that you may not even know, or for equity in pay. We know that women and people of color definitely most times make less on the dollar than other people. So I found myself like asking my friends and my colleagues at certain institutions, like, okay, so like, how much they offer you? And you'd be surprised. It could be like $50,000 or $100,000 more. And I went and I advocated for myself and I got a raise. So those kinds of things can make a difference. And then the third thing that I love that you said was, not only did you just look out for yourself, but you pulled somebody else up. So you talk to someone else and you're like, hey, you want to go to this, or can you nominate them? So don't be selfish. Like, it's all about improving the landscape for those who are coming after us and building your network and having kind of like, I know you guys are probably hearing me talk about this, but a lot of these things with the networking and stuff kind of goes towards like having your own personal board of directors where you don't go to everybody for everything, but there are people who are all rooting for you and who can give you advice on different subjects. So you might go to your department chair or your colleague or one of your friends from med school or one of your friends from college if you're still a pre-med, or even longitudinally, because I have a lot of friends from college, or even someone like your mom or your partner and stuff. Like, they all can have some different kinds of viewpoint in you because everyone sees you differently from their own perspective. And then they all have their own gifts in which they can help you propel yourself forward towards your goals.
Everything you say, I agree with. I mean, that personal board of directors part is key and aspirational. Like, it's okay if you're pre-med and you don't have one yet, but it's an aspiration. Like, I want to try to pull people in. I wanted to talk, I don't know how much more time we have, but just about nurturing relationships. So we talked a lot about networking. So many students and even residents are nervous about how do you maybe you had that initial conversation with someone for like 5 minutes or 10 minutes in the hall, or even a short one-time 20-minute call. But like, how do you actually nurture that relationship so that you can go back to them and feel like it's a safe space? I've learned from this. I've learned, number one, these relationships are bi-directional. Like, you can't just take. You have to offer, like, how can I help you? Mm-hmm. The second is, again, sort of going back to the ownership. I mean, obviously you don't own a person, but you can consider yourself owning the relationship to a degree when it comes to like the operationalization. I'm not sure if I'm saying a correct word, if I made that word up, but putting all the logistics on your plate, such as scheduling the meetings, putting the links to a Zoom meeting on the calendar invite, making sure that the calendar invite is correct as far as the date, the time, who's going to be there, email addresses are included. That sort of like behind the scenes work is great if the student or the resident or the junior faculty member or whoever it is that's like needing that extra support is driving that. Because to me, you know, if a meeting is not on my calendar, like, I don't know, it doesn't exist. It's not real until it's on my calendar. It's not because I'm a bad person. It's just, I have 3 kids. I have a lot. And so it's really hard for me to put all these things on my plate. And I am openly admitting to the fact that I can't remember everything. And so that's one thing is sort of controlling the logistics and getting that on. The third is sort of pacing your asks and the amount of time you're asking of someone. You know, I usually say if it's just someone who's going to be in your network, right? Like me and you, Erkeda, if we wanted just to meet probably annually, just to check in, I feel like that'd be a good amount. Mm-hmm. If we're just like, how are you doing? How's life? What are you up to these days? But if you and I are perhaps along the same journey and we wanted to discuss, like, when are you applying to this and that? And, you know, maybe they're a peer in your group, you might want to check in more regularly. So there's like a huge spectrum as far as how often you meet with someone. It could be as much as every week if you're working on an active project to once a year. I think at minimum, if you consider someone part of your core network, you should be meeting with them once a year though, so that it just stays fresh, so that when they think about who their mentees are, you're on that list. Because if you wait too long, then I think it's easy to sort of be pushed sort of out of that light and they might forget about you.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Like, you have to be intentional about your interactions and be authentic. So meet with them, like, not just to be like, oh, you're an orthopedic surgeon, I want to go into like, if you have interests, talk about them, of course, and try to figure out ways in which you can authentically build relationships and network. And like you said, it can be in different cadences. Like, okay, for your clerkship director, if they're mentoring you and those kinds of things, or your interest group leader or something like that, you may be meeting with them quarterly or something like that. But if there's, I don't know, something like we both like doing education through healthcare media and stuff like that, and say we wanted to meet quarterly or something like that, you just have to figure out what that is for you and how you can make an impact. Or even if it's one of your classmates and you're like, okay, I don't want to study with you every day, I need some me time, but maybe every 2 weeks, let's make sure we're solidifying the material. Let's put it in the calendar. And doing those types of things are important because it only gets busier as you progress and life happens. So school is not going to be your only component of life. So you have to figure out how to navigate those things and how to integrate them, because you're going to be a 3rd year, then you're going to be a 4th year, then you're going to be in residency, and then life hits you. So work on figuring out those things now.
And you can ask along the way, like if you have a question such as like, how often should I be meeting with this person? You're early in your career. I think that's a great question to ask them. Like, I want to make sure that I'm timing this right. Like, would it be better if we meet quarterly, annually? And they'll give you some input and say, well, why don't we meet in 3 months? Since the goals that I just gave you are pretty big, I don't think you're going to be able to solve them by next week. So we won't have anything new to discuss, right? So a lot of times it has to do with a to-do list from like the end of one meeting, as far as like how much time you're going to take to process that or complete any action items. That's usually how I gauge when we should meet next.
Absolutely. I definitely appreciate all of your pearls of wisdom. For our last question, I want to ask you what I asked most of my guests in terms of thinking big. So we all know that our healthcare system has some room for improvement. If you were to have a magic wand, what is something that you would change about the healthcare system?
Oh, wow. That's really tough. I think, well, so I'm specific to emergency medicine, and I think morale, it really took a hit with the pandemic, and I don't think it's really fully bounced back. I don't think it ever will. I will say, and I'm going to plug something. But I will say one thing that has helped me was to pursue my ambitions now versus the like waiting until I retire, like my personal ambitions. Because I think what happens in the healthcare sector is right now with like burnout is a lot of people have felt fully defined by their job. And then now this like pandemic hit. And I think a lot of people were initially encouraged by the healthcare system and supported. And now they sort of see like, oh, I actually am just an employee to a certain extent. I see that. And so I think probably year 3 of the pandemic or so, year 2, I said, I've seen so many people pass away because of COVID and other things, cancer and stuff. And I've seen it at young ages and older. And I said, I don't know how long I have. Why am I waiting until I retire to do all of these other like really personal things? And so that's when I started writing a book. And if I could change something with a magic wand, I would have people do the things that are going to complete them now so that when they go to work, they're not like resenting that gap. They feel like, yes, I'm here to work. I love my job. It's a source of income. It's a source of connection to other people. And I'm also glad I have space for things like what you're doing, Erkeda, this podcast and other stuff, right? Just imagine if you didn't have time for this podcast because you were so busy with work, you might feel a little bit of resentment towards the job. So for me, when I started to cut back on work a little bit and take time to write the book, I felt that balance come back to me.
I could not agree more, and I don't really have anything to add to that. So as we close, I want you to tell us about this book. Number 1, we may have to have you come back on the show and talk a little bit more about it, and also tell our listeners where they can find you.
Yeah. So the book is called Micro Skills, Small Actions, Big Impact. And I don't know if you have show notes or anything, but I'm happy to give you the link and cover image and stuff. It comes out April 16th. So just less than 3 months. You can pre-order now anywhere like Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. And honestly, the book is a collection of all of the lessons I've learned about the workplace. So if anything that I said here resonated with you, there's like way more of that in the book. It's just like, how did I go from, Rialto, California? My dad had community college, he didn't even graduate from community college, but he has some community college education. And then my mom went to like one of those 2-year nursing programs. So no college she doesn't have a bachelor's. And so I, went through this experience of not really seeing someone make it to graduate level education. And now I was able to sort of get through all of those struggles and get to Harvard. I feel like that was a challenging process for myself. And I want to share all of the lessons. I have a co-author, Dr. Risa E. Lewis. We want to share all of those lessons. So the book is being published with HarperCollins, which is like a huge honor to be traditionally published, because I'm going to tell you, not many Black people are able to get traditional book deals, and that's really sad. But we're published traditionally, and I think it's a really great book for people who are early in their career, and they're like, how can I be a polished communicator? How can I become a subject matter expert? How do I network? Those sorts of things. It's a very strategic how-to book. And then as far as reaching out to me, I always offer myself to meet with people. In fact, just before I signed on to this, I met with 2 people today who have reached out to me. I have a few meetings tomorrow. And so I love to meet with people, like I said, about building the connections and helping others. I'm on social media. You can find me. It's just at Adaira Landry, MD. I'm on Instagram and Twitter, now X. And I actually even have a TikTok, though I haven't yet started using X. I'm shy, but it's there. I'm not shy. I'm social media shy. And so I haven't actually started posting because I know they like a lot of videos and stuff. But I think those are the main things I'm on, but you can reach out to me in those ways.
Well, thank you so much. And we'll be sure to put the links for the book in the show notes. And for anybody who has any requests for any specific topics or any other guests that you would like to have on the show, just reach out to me on my Instagram at Dr. D Graham, DOCTOR, the letter D GRAM. And we'll be back again next week with another fantastic guest. Bye.
Each episode of the Prospective Doctor podcast is brought to you by Med School Coach. To access articles, videos, webinars, and free tools to help you succeed on your journey toward med school and beyond, visit our website, prospectivedoctor.com. We hope you tune in again next time.